Hi, welcome to Dr. Lisa Solcenti's podcast, where we're going to talk about picky eaters. This is a really big conversation because, a lot of the times we think picky eating is just a child being really difficult about food. They're stubborn. You can have one child that eats absolutely anything and then have another child that's like only eating 3 things. I know this because I've had this. I've gone through this many, many times with my son, and I want to share what I figured out and how I helped my son become a better eater. But also, when I was working in my home, I brought it into my office. So I also want to share with you what I clinically have learned. And this solution, this 5-step solution I'm going to share with you, really comes from a program I created in my office years ago called Food Play. And that's it. Exactly what it sounds like is what we did. Is I started 5 sessions. They'd come in 5 times, and each session we would play with different foods, and there would be an educational component to this. We would learn about the different foods. But what I realized in a picky eater is that many cases there's a fear of food. So there's different types of picky eaters. So let's unwrap that. There is the child that is just being stubborn and has learned to manipulate the parent, and they're just digging their heels in, and they're just like, nope, I'm not eating this. And the parent gives up and the child just wins. So there is the child that might not have a neurological issue. They might not have a physical issue or a health issue or something relating to it, which we're going to get into in a minute. And so there is just a, neurotypical child that is just being really stubborn about food and is kind of learning that they can get their way. So that's one type of child. My program or my solution helps that child too. But the other type of child is a child that has sensory issues, or has maybe a fear of food for some reason, or has, there could be like an oral problem, like an actual mouth problem, tongue-tied, things like that, where they really can't chew. But sensory issues are actually really big. It could be the texture of the food, the taste of the food, the crunchiness, the non-crunchiness, like some kids just don't like eggs because of texture, because of, and then again, it comes down to taste. So there's not always the child just being stubborn, right? That's not actually most of the cases. So what we need to do with a picky eater is we need to step back and try to figure out why the child could be afraid of this food, or why they might be struggling. If it is the child's avoiding a sensation such as taste or texture, the smell of the food, the sight of the food, that's really important to note, because what's happening here is this information's coming into the body. So they might smell the food and just really not like the smell of the food, or they might taste the food, right? And what they're going to do is that information's going to go into the brain, and it can be integrated as fear. And so fear, when it's perceived in the brain, it can actually, the body can think it's in like an emergency scenario, or it's going to actually create harm. So this might be hard to grasp, but this is actually true. When I learned this with my son, is there were times where he would smell something like turkey and he would physically feel pain. He would physically feel fear. So he would go into that fight or flight mode. And there was just no way you were ever going to get a picky eater out of fight or flight mode, or out of some kind of, I'm in pain, that makes me feel uncomfortable, that actually physically hurts me. There could be sounds like that too, where they hear a sound and they literally physically feel pain in their body. So the child's really going to avoid the food. Right? So the nervous system is now going to be avoiding the food due to maybe these sensory sensations. We also can have oral and motor issues related. So the food placement in the mouth, problems chewing, problems swallowing. So motor issues can keep the child from being able to move the food around, chew, pick up the food. There's things like I just mentioned. There's tongue-tie, there's gag reflex. There's just a lot of things that can be going on here that puts the nervous system in fight or flight. So you have to imagine, put yourself in the shoes of your child, if you were in fight or flight, if you were scared, that, oh my gosh, I have to run, I'm really nervous, and you're trying to eat something, and that something is actually what's causing the fight or flight, it's almost impossible that you're going to eat it, right? So if I'm having an anxiety over something, your brain does become irrational because the brain is like a light switch. It just switches to fight or flight. It's not going to switch onto being rational and listening to mom explain it's okay, the food's fine, it's just really hard. So we want to help both types of children, the child that maybe that's just being stubborn and kind of winning here, and the child that is having this neurological, sensory, or motor, overload, putting the body into fight or flight. So what I've created is I do have a guide that you can go to my website. My website is drlisasolsenti.com. And on there, I've created a book. It's called The Picky Eater Survival Guide. I'm reviewing a bit from it on this podcast and the next podcast, but you can actually purchase this book for yourself and you can go through it. It has a workbook in it, and what I have done is I've created this from the full experience of doing food play in my practice for years with many types of children, and it being quite successful. And that program actually came from the experience as a mom with a child with Asperger's or autism spectrum disorders and having a severe sensory avoidance of foods. So my child used to only basically eat, he liked croutons, he liked Cheerios, and he liked tortillas, and he would wrap them up, and it was always crunchy. Even if you did a chicken nugget with him, it was always, he would just eat like the crunchy part of the chicken nugget. He really never ate the chicken. So in this scenario, he was having this sensory thing where he liked crunchy, right? That was giving him the input for sensory. So this I'm going to share with you on the podcast, and it's also in the guide if you need it. The one thing you need to understand as we move forward is that you are in control, not your child. And this is something I had to repeat over and over to myself, that no matter why my son was a picky eater, or no matter what battle we were having, that I had to understand that I was in control of what he eats, what I buy him, what I go shopping for, what I decide to cook, and whatever I decide to feed. These are my decisions. So a lot of parents give up here, including myself. I did, believe me. But bluntly put, your child isn't really in control until maybe they're a teenager or in college of what they're eating. So when they're young, they eat what you feed them. So this means that you're in control of deciding what food battles you want to have and how you want to approach this. And I do agree that sometimes the battle's not worth having. However, this isn't something you have to just give up on completely. If you learn to implement these strategies and solutions that I have in my Picky Eater Survival Guide, and we're going to talk about in the podcast, you'll be able to get back in the driver's seat. You'll get back your control. And this really isn't a negative thing. It's a great thing because your child wants you to be in control. I think that's a lot of parents. We don't realize that they want us to make these decisions for them. And we want to help them overcome their fear of certain foods, right? If it's due to, let's say, oral, motor, or sensory issues, he wants the skills to learn to overcome that. So this is what we're doing. We're going to help teach the child to trust and explore and fall in love with healthy foods. And it's a little bit of a trick. I'm not kidding you, but I'm going to teach you them. So I have a 5-step solution. And in the time that we have left in the podcast, we're going to talk about the first 4. And then the next part 2 of this is going to do part 5 because that's a really big one. The first step is to identify any food and health issues. So this is really important because sometimes food issues are actually related to different things. So you need a proper evaluation to know really what's going on with your child. If you don't know your child has ADD or ADHD or sensory issues, if you don't know that your child might have like diabetes or digestive issues, a lot of the food avoidances might be coming from something like that. So you want to really just make sure that you kind of know what you're dealing with, right? So you have some better understanding. So that's the first step. The second step is to make healthy versions of your child's favorite foods. Now, that might sound simple, I get it, but it's super rewarding. And once you tackle how to do this, it's a win-win. Completely a win-win. I'm going to share a story that many of you may have heard if you've been following me, but it's a great story. And it's actually from a patient in my practice where we did food play. And it was my Nutella story. He just loved Nutella. And if you look at Nutella, you just need to Google the ingredients. It's not a healthy food pick. It's full of sugar. It's got some bad fats in it. It's got very little nuts, which is why you would do Nutellas, because you want to get those healthy fats, especially for ADD, ADHD, lots of things. I mean, we're talking just health all in general is these omega-3, these healthy fats. So you really want Nutella to be from the nuts, correct? So we're feeding this child. He's obsessed with this crappy Nutella. And what I did was slowly in one of my, I knew this, so slowly in one of my sessions with him, we introduced proteins, and I made sure that he saw hazelnuts and things like that. And we played with them. That's a whole different thing. And we made, one of the recipes was make Nutella, and we made them together, and he touched it and he's smelling it. And when a child's part of a recipe, they are looking at colors, they're touching foods, they're smelling foods, and they're getting their sensories, eyes, ears, nose, smell, I guess I'm eyes, ears, nose, it's all that, your sight, your smell, your sound, your taste, things like that, touch, you're getting them used to it. So this is what's really cool. So he and we made Nutella from hazelnuts. So you could use hazelnuts or you could use almonds. I found that those two work really well. And when we made it, he ate it. He ate the homemade Nutella, which basically was the nuts. We roast them. I brought them in roasted. I believe we used a little maple syrup, unsweetened cocoa or cacao powder, and a little maple syrup to sweetness. That's it. It was like 4 healthy ingredients. And he ate it. He loved it. And Mom was like, she was standing there shocked, but she was standing there. You could tell she was a little annoyed. And I have been there. I have totally been there. I have so many stories. And when I looked at her and I just laughed because I knew where she was in her mind, she was like frustrated. She was just so frustrated. Like, how is he eating this homemade Nutella for her? So when she got home, she was making it and it was doing really well until, he decided no. He just was. And so what she figured out was if she put it in the Nutella container from the store, the crappy Nutella, if she put the homemade Nutella in the crappy Nutella, container, he ate it. So maybe you might think you're tricking your kid or not, but she just started realizing that he's overcome that and he can eat a healthy Nutella. So this is an example of making a healthier version of your child's favorite food. He didn't give up Nutella. What the mom did was she went the distance and she wound up making a really healthy version of something that her child absolutely loves. And we figured out together of how to get him to that point. I have lots of stories and examples in the guide. So that's something that you want to do. You want to look for these recipes, try to make them with your child, and so on. But if you're having trouble getting your child from point A to point B, you go to my step 3, which is called food mapping. And food mapping is evaluating a child's favorite food. So we could look at Nutella, but I'm going to use a different example so we can go a little further with thought. And expanding on their likeness to try and accept new foods that are actually similar to the favorite food. So the goal of food mapping is each week you're going to introduce a new food item that is very, very similar to the one that they love. And you're just going to basically stick with the same type of food but explore maybe different brands or different, variations of it. And food mapping is teaching both the parent and the child to foster this understanding of proper food behavior and food wisdom. And although food mapping achieved the best results in my practice, when I combined it with the food play sessions and the parent implemented some behavioral things at home, it just excelled. So the way it really works, and I go over it more in depth, and there's actually worksheets for it in the Picky Eater Survival Guide for you. I walk you through it step by step. But for the podcast's sake, the gist of it is, let's say that your child loves McDonald's chicken nuggets, and for some strange reason you're stuck on this loop of always buying these because now the child's like obsessed with them, and for the life of you can't get them to eat a homemade chicken nugget, because this is what happens with children in general. The brain just starts liking this one thing and it gets stuck on it. And again, if we have sensory issues and we've got all these other issues, it's almost like I gave up myself. It's just really hard. But what you're going to do is you're going to explain to your child that you're going to play a food mapping game where each week the child, I'm going to say he's going to try a new chicken nugget from a different place. And you can make this fun. You can keep track. And in part 2, I'm going to talk about the behavior and the behavior reward system that we use. So you could put this in the reward system. But let's say the child loves McDonald's. The next week, you just want them to try Burger King, right? And so you're just going to get them to try a different version of their favorite food. You might say, Doc, what you're doing is basically trading one junky chicken nugget to another junky chicken nugget. That's not healthy. Right, but we can't go with some kids from a junky chicken nugget to a healthy homemade mom's chicken nuggets. That's too far of a jump for some kids for many reasons. So what you want to do is you want to say, all right, well, they're obsessed with McDonald's, but let's try Burger King's. Burger King might have more pepper. It might have a different texture. It might have a different flavor. They definitely don't look the same. So again, we're talking about getting them to start trusting something that looks different, right? Something that smells different. Hey, that don't taste the same. We want them to get over those fears. And sometimes, it's not even your child's fault. It's their brain is doing it, and the child's just kind of going along with it. Then another week, you might want to try Wendy's chicken nuggets, right? And you do this. This is called mapping. So you're kind of mapping yourself step by step away from the original one, expanding out and trying some new things. And you might move to a frozen brand from the local food store. And maybe it's a junky one, right? And a lot of those kids like those dinosaur ones. If that's where you're stuck, if you're on the dinosaur ones, try different frozen brands, right? Try to get yourself to the healthiest frozen brand one you can find, and change up these brands. And what you're doing between, the Burger King, the Wendy's, the frozen brands, is you're trying to get them to try these different textures, these different choices. And your goal is to eventually get your child to have a healthy chicken cutlet or maybe grilled chicken, right? So I have a recipe on my website that is my homemade chicken nuggets. There's also homemade chicken fingers. So you can move them maybe towards that. And eventually, as your child gets a little older, they might do, a grilled chicken on the grill. But you have got to move away from McDonald's chicken nuggets. If you stay there for years, guess what? They stay there. And it's a bit of a fear. It might not be that they walk into Wendy's and they're freaking out and crying and they're afraid. Like, you might not see the panic. You might not see the flight or flight, but it's there. So this is where food mapping is super successful. In my home, it was super successful in my practice. And again, these small steps, they lead to big, big, big changes. And I get super excited and geeky to talk about this stuff because I've overcome a lot of this. My son is the healthiest eater out of my kids. He just knows, because he's learned when he eats healthy, his brain is balanced, he's focused, his Asperger's or his ASD is more under control. And then when he doesn't eat well, or he is 24 years old, so now it's a little bit of a different, and he can tell. He's like, I don't feel well when I don't eat right, or my brain isn't balanced, or I don't do as well at work, So these are things that he just had great success with. I also want to tell you, there's a food mapping worksheet in here. I'm looking at it now. And I go over a lot of that. The last one that I'm going to leave you with, and then we're going to go to the part 2, is as you're doing this, start playing with the food. Food play is having fun with food, finding a place where the parent and the child can bond and fall in love with food. This is what I did. This was super successful in the practice, and I taught the parent to do this. So I did it with the child, and then I said to the mom or the dad, now you're going to be me. You're going to replace me. So what I'm doing in his sessions or her sessions is playing with food. So it begins providing both the parent and the child these adaptive strategies to identify the food issues and overcome that smell, sight, and anxiety of food, right? Because they're playing with the food. You have to make it fun. And especially, in the summer months, the spring months, the fall months, the warmer weather, you can go outside and get a little more creative, which you might want, if you didn't want to do something in your home. But what I recommend is doing food mapping and food play. And the last part, which is going to be part 2, is then doing the food behavior. So food mapping, food play, and food behavior. I'm going to touch more on food play and then part 2, so join me over there and I'll jump more into it. But again, the Picky Eater Survival Guide has a whole worksheet, a whole workbook part of this that really I walk you through it. And I am taking what was super successful in my practice and home and literally giving it to you right here, so you don't have to have a child that won't eat healthy, because you need to get these micronutrients. We know what macros are: carbs, fat, proteins. But you need the micros, which are all the small little nutrients, all the vitamins, all the minerals, the antioxidants, the amino acids, the healthy fats, your phytonutrients. You need all these to have a balanced brain, to have a healthy heart, to have your hormones working right, to have a healthy gut. All this stuff is super, super important. So as a parent, you can take this and you can implement this in your house. It's not an overnight thing. It's not a quick fix. It's something that you slowly start implementing into your home. And I'm going to leave you with this one thought, because it's huge. If you don't teach your child to eat healthy, most likely nobody will. Your child may luck out and, maybe get into working out and get into, the gym, or maybe take some nutrition classes, and they may go down that road themselves. But most children grow up and don't really know much about nutrition. So, or they're just going to learn off of Facebook or Instagram or something like that, which really is not the best place. So you are the first place that they're going to learn about food. So implement this, because it really, really fosters a love for healthy food. Thank you so much. Remember, this doesn't replace your medical care. It's educational information for your purposes so you can improve your life. Thank you.